Welcome to the Newsmakers Podcast. I'm Billy Hollowell, and this is a show where we go behind the headlines every day to bring you an interview with a pastor, entertainer, politician, or other notable news figure. And this is a show, again, it's daily, but it's based on our weekly TV show, which is also called Newsmakers. You can watch it on the CBN News channel and also on our YouTube page. And on this show, every day, we dive deep. It's a little more longer form with one of the people who you will often see on our Newsmakers show or across the CBN News platforms. On today's Newsmakers, an ex-porn star joins us to talk all about her journey out of the industry and to Jesus. With no further ado, here is Bree Solstad. So Bree, I so appreciate you joining me today. I know that you have your story. First of all, it's crazy. It's been in so many places. A lot of people are very intrigued by your journey. But let's just start before finding faith. Tell us a little bit what your life was like.
Sure. Thank you for having me. Also, it's an honor to be here. Before I truly developed the relationship that I have now with God, I honestly thought that I was like everybody else, just self-centered, focused on my career, making money in order to be able to go on lavish vacations. I cared for my loved ones, and every now and then I would speak to God, mainly if I needed something. It was that one-way kind of relationship. So basically, I feel like a lot of people are where I was. I thought that my life was, pretty much as good as it gets. I was irritable quite often and angry, and I tried exercise, I tried therapy. And all of those feelings just still lingered within me. But I thought, again, this is as good as it gets. So everything's just working out fine. I didn't know any different.
Yeah. And, as you were on that journey when it came to career, how did you end up in the career that you were in?
So just drinking a lot, reckless lifestyle, promiscuity, and I didn't have any sort of faith, any sort of direction. And from there, it was just, I was working at dead end jobs, and nothing really meant that much to me. And I was at a place that was pretty much perfect for a woman who reached out and suggested that I would be really good at what she was doing, which was pornography, which with an emphasis on female domination and that sort of thing. And she saw in me, which I'm embarrassed to admit, the potential of like an extreme narcissist who would be really good at playing, a bratty princess. And I think, my upbringing had a little bit to do with that. I come from a single parent, only child household. So it was really easy for me to fall into that life of not just sin, and not just ego or pride, but true narcissism, where, you know, every day throughout pretty much the past 10 years, I used to pretend to be this person who would step over you to get what I want. And pretty soon it's not pretending anymore. And I equated a lot to, Pavlov's dog, where these men that I would interact with, they really wanted me to be mean and cruel and bratty and prideful. And the meaner I was, the more that I became this person, the more money I would make, the more attention that I would get, the more, it seemed that I was a success. And so it's really, like Pavlov's dog, where you just keep on giving me this recognition, then I'm just going to keep on striving to be that person. And pretty soon, before you know it, you really are that person.
Yeah. And, let me ask you this, because when I've talked to other people who have come out of the adult film industry and out of pornography, they will talk about how the personality that they created, many times it becomes, as you were sort of saying, who they are, and they lose the person that they once were, or maybe they never really knew who they were, but they develop into this person. Talk a little bit more about that, losing yourself in the midst of all of that and what that was like.
Well, it truly is a persona that you put, not only online on social media, but also on all the places, on all the platforms that you're selling your stuff. Um, and you become not only just you've lost any sense of what you were proud of before and who you were before, but now it's replaced with the pride of making the most money or being the most humiliating, being the cruelest that you can be. And it becomes really kind of isolating because, as you can imagine, well, my story is that when I first started in the industry, I became, quote unquote, friends with a lot of these girls. But as you can imagine, being the biggest narcissist in the room doesn't lend to friends. Narcissism doesn't just apply with clients or people of the opposite sex, it's each other as well. And it just becomes really isolating because the people that I did tell, my people, my friends who are like in the normal world, I guess, that I did tell about my job, most of them stopped being friends with me. And then the people who I was friends with in this new industry, I realized pretty quickly that I couldn't trust them and they weren't really friends. And I myself had become like them. It was, I mean, it was a slow process, so it wasn't something like all of a sudden I just woke up and realized that I didn't like my life or where I was, and it wasn't anything from anybody other than God.
Yeah, and I want to get into that conversion experience and talk about that. But one question for you, as you were sort of entering into this and that woman saw things in you that she thought, okay, you'll be good at this job. Was there hesitation? Was there not? I'm curious, sort of, even as you were doing it, did you have moments of thinking, okay, maybe I want to step out of this? I'm very curious because obviously a decade is a long time. So would love to hear sort of what was going through your mind during that time.
Yeah, I've gotten that question a lot actually, and the answer is honestly no. There was never any hesitation, there was never any voice in the back of my head, and there also wasn't anyone within my life, like actually physically, who told me don't do this. There were friends who left because of it, but that just made me even more like righteous of how dare you judge me. Um, Again, I wasn't recruited in a way where a lot of people think nowadays of pornography as, you put in a DVD and there's multiple people engaging in sex. And I think that if that had been the recruitment offer, it would have been different. But one thing that I'm kind of trying to spread around to people who are of an older generation, especially parents, is that this is no longer, your grandma's porn. It's interactive, it's hypnotic, it's designed to be addictive, and it's most often done, with just one person as a POV. And so that's how it was presented to me: is you could be your own boss, you could create all this content, just you and your living room. It's really quite easy nowadays to begin this industry. Another point I always like to make is it's not easy to make a lot of money doing this. I think there's a misconception that you just post your pictures on OnlyFans and suddenly you're a millionaire. That's not what happens. It's so much more than that. It's so much more of yourself than that. And I think just after a little while, you become that person, and really, um, there's there's nobody in your life saying don't do this, and there's no real nagging feelings because it's all reward. I would get the only detrimental feedback that I would get is from social media, people calling me names that I probably can't repeat here. Um, and again, I would just think of those like that's not real. Those aren't
Right.
people who actually care about me. It's not like somebody sat me down and said, you're worth more than this. What you're doing is dirty, and it in the long run, that you're not going to feel good about this. Maybe not today, and maybe not tomorrow, but eventually, And that's really a big part of my story too, is I did this for 10 years. And I've said previously that eventually you just feel trapped. I'm sure that there are many, many other women who felt much more trapped than me. I didn't feel, hysterical, or, I didn't have some kind of nervous breakdown or anything like that. But at a point, you do feel trapped in a sense that you've been doing this for so long, and what are you going to do now? Let's forget about the money for a second, because you're never going to find another job where that's this lucrative, that gives you this much freedom. But let's just pretend that you'll be okay, even just getting a job at like a garden center, which is where I thought maybe I would try to apply. What am I going to write on my resume that I've been doing for the last 10 years? Why is there this huge gap in my life? Oh, do you have kids? No. Okay, well, I can't use that as an excuse. And even if I were to write something like some sort of flowery euphemism on my resume, like artistic entertainer, that's just going to lead to more questions. And eventually, I think psychologically also it weighs on you, because maybe you even start to think that you're you can't do anything other than this, because you've been doing this for so long, and maybe even you're not worth any more than this. And you are.
And it completely traps you in that. And I've heard that many times. That's a very common theme, or people thinking, I'm never going to amount to anything, I'm never going to do anything else, so this is all I really have. So obviously people hearing this story and this journey, they're wondering, well, here you are, you're on the other side of it now, right? You've come to faith, and you didn't have people sitting you down, you didn't have people saying you got to stop doing this, you're worth more, as you were saying. What was it that made you finally say, not only I need to find God, but something's not right here? Or maybe you found God first. I'd love to sort of hear that journey out of this after 10 years.
Sure. Well, like a lot of good stories, mine begins with a tragedy. About 3 years ago, something happened that is what I can only describe as the worst thing that is and ever will happen to me. When that occurred, I remember actually falling down on my knees, praying to God so hard that my knuckles turned white. Please, please don't let this happen. Please, please make this okay. Make it all better. Reverse time. Please, please don't let this happen. But he did. He let it happen. And I was really, really mad at God for a long time, because by definition, tragedy is something that occurs that wasn't supposed to happen. And it really was an accident. So I had nobody to blame. The only person that I could blame for this, it was God, is what I felt. And I begged him to make it all right, and he didn't. And so I took that to mean that he turned his back on me. He didn't answer my prayers when I needed him the most. And so I decided, you know what, you're going to turn your back on me, then I'm going to turn my back on you. And I know that we didn't really have a strong relationship, but this is the only thing that I can think of to hurt you, which is just silly and funny. But, even though I didn't have a whole lot of God in my life, I just thought like that was the only thing that I could do is, and from now on, you're excommunicated, canceled, you're out. So that went on for several years. And I went to church maybe a couple of times with some family members, like Christmas or Easter or that sort of thing. And even just that, being in a house of God, I was still so mad at him, so mad at myself, so hurt, so distraught, that throughout the entire Christmas service, like I just cried the whole time. And just even being near him, I couldn't do it. Fast forward about 3 years later, that's about a year ago now. This past spring, I had an opportunity to go to Italy, to travel Italy, and so I jumped at the chance. And Italy really has, in my opinion, the best artwork in the entire world, and the history of art, Western civilization artwork. That's where it's at. And all of this incredible artwork happens to be found in churches and basilicas. So I went there with the intent of visiting the house of God several times, like even up to like a dozen times a day. And I didn't really think that much of it. I didn't really make that connection like I to the response that I had when I went to Easter Mass. And instead, I was going into these churches thinking of them more like museums, a place to appreciate artwork. But then something started to change in me within these old churches and basilicas. You enter in, and in a Catholic church, I'm sure I don't have to tell you this, but the crucifix is always right there, right on display. God's greatest gift to us, right there. And so it's kind of like you can't get around it, He's always right there as soon as you walk in. Another thing I noticed is the change in me is the way that I started appreciating the artwork. It wasn't just for its beauty, but it was also, I started to think about the theology behind it and the roles that different people played. Now, but the most significant thing is I started to notice Mary. I was raised Lutheran and didn't really have like a super strong upbringing of the faith. I went to church every Sunday. I was active in youth group, but really quickly fell away from that and had no relationship whatsoever to Mary. I basically had no idea who she was other than, Mother of God. But in these Catholic churches, basilicas, she was always there, but she wasn't right on display like the crucifix was. She was always kind of somewhere a little more humbling, like in an alcove or an adjacent, cathedral area somewhere. And so going into these places, I started to seek her out and started to kind of talk to her. And I noticed her also not just in churches. In Italy, she's everywhere. She's in these like tiny paintings on street corners. And I noticed her on like a barista's bracelet. I'm like, is this woman stalking me? Maybe there's something to it. So since she kept, following me around, I thought, well, I'd at least acknowledge her. This is going to be kind of awkward at this point. So I'd go into these churches. I'd acknowledge the crucifix, I'd look at the artwork, and then I would go and seek out Mary. And I started talking to her, and I would say, first of all, it's just, hello, it's nice to meet you. And then I started kind of opening up to her, and especially about my tragedy and what I had gone through. Very quickly, we became close friends. She has gone through probably the greatest tragedy in the history of the world, and she went through it with grace and with beauty and with dignity. And she never questioned it. She accepted it immediately. And I wanted to be like that. And I wanted to ask her to help me to be more like that with my own tragedy. And so from there, really things started to change. And after Rome, I visited Assisi, if for no other reason, because I was totally into St. Francis. I'm an animal lover, and I refer to St. Francis as kind of like a gateway saint. Even non-Catholics have a statue of him in their garden. So went to Assisi for St. Francis, but was really blown away by St. Clare. We have an amazing connection. I had learned about her in the research that I did prior to the trip, but she's always kind of portrayed as like St. Francis's sidekick. If you think of her that way, all of you listening, watching, I urge you to learn more about her. She's an amazing one. I have her right here. She's incredible. But what happened was we had the opportunity to visit her tomb. She has a corpse that is incorrupted, and it's just beautiful. It's in a glass coffin, and you have the opportunity to kneel right in front of her, which I did. Kneeling right in front of her, I closed my eyes, and I saw her. She appeared to me. She was right there in front of me, glowing. She was seated. She was wearing this cream-colored gown. And what she said to me, she spoke, and she said something that seems really weird, but it made so much sense to me at the time. She said, "You can put her here." And she gestured to her lap. "See how soft my lap is, how comforting it is. See how soft my forearms are. I'll take her," meaning my tragedy. And I just started weeping. And I felt a relief I felt a weight lifted from my shoulders. I felt like she was suggesting, you don't have to take on all of this yourself. I can help you with this. And I've since um, really come to realize that not only was she offering to help me with this, but she was also offering to give it up to God for me. That's something I still struggle with, is giving my suffering up to God. So that was just really intense. Like I said, I felt like I could breathe easier after that, but it wasn't the type of experience where then I was like, bam, okay, Catholic, here we go, sign me up. I'm gonna stop sinning. No, I walked out of that basilica and I remember, like I said, like looking around, everything seemed a little bit different, but at the same time, it was like, okay, so where are we going next? It wasn't like a major conversion right then and there. It was a slow burn. So from there, I'm back home from Italy, and I think of it kind of, people have equated my feelings to returning from a pilgrimage where, you visited all these amazing holy sites and you had all these really deep connections and you felt closer to God while you were there. And then you get home and it's like the daily grind and you have all these responsibilities and okay, I can barely get to mass on Sunday. But you want to rekindle those feelings. And that's really where I was at. I got home and I wanted to continue on that journey that was leading me closer to God back home, essentially. And so I started going to Catholic Mass. As weird as it was, I knew that I wasn't going to get those feelings from a Lutheran church. And I knew I wasn't going to continue with those feelings, just sitting at home. Started going to Catholic Mass, felt a little bit awkward, being, raised Lutheran. Also, I'm still producing pornography at this point. And so I remember hearing one homily where they were talking about the evils of pornography, and I just kind of like wanted to sink into the pew. Like, this is awkward. And, but I started really also examining my own life. That was, the fruit of this, was that, it started with beauty and artwork, led me to the Catholic Church. Someone's talking about how pornography bad it is. I used to think, whatever, you don't know anything. But at this point, it is starting to kind of seep in. And I'm starting to think about my life and I'm starting to get really disgusted. I'm really disgusted.
Wow. For the first time, you're starting to feel maybe I'm doing something that is wrong.
Precisely.
Wow.
And then really the immense change was at that point, I still wasn't sure about jumping in with both feet. And so I made an appointment with and spoke with a Catholic priest. I wanted, advice from someone, with some authority. And I talked with him for about an hour. He said many, many wonderful things, brilliant advice and all of this. But the most significant thing that he said to me and what I walked away from that meeting with was he told me, God loves me and God doesn't want me to be unhappy. And that just blew my mind. It wasn't like I'd ever given up that idea, but just to hear someone with a sense of authority tell me that God doesn't want me to be unhappy. And I took that to mean God doesn't want me to be sinning. God doesn't want this break between him and I anymore. God doesn't want me producing pornography. God wants me to do something that won't make me unhappy. And that was just huge for me. And that's really when everything changed. And after that meeting, I signed up for RCIA, and the rest is history, really.
No, I mean, I love you sort of taking us through that journey, because obviously people have seen the photos of you, coming into the church and joining and into the Catholic Church. One of the big questions for me, obviously you're making an income. This was your living. And so how hard was it to make that choice to say, even though I know this is wrong, I'm going to move into what I assume is a scary sort of realm of having to figure out what it is you're going to do for a living? What was that transition like for you?
Mm-hmm. Again, I want to emphasize that I think that it it is probably a struggle for a lot of women. And I know this firsthand from the women who have, since my conversion, reached out and, even suggested that they might want to quit. I feel like I was very lucky in the circumstance that I was in, to the point where I was at a place where it was easy for me to just say, I'm going to trust God. But also, I had a lot of savings. So I can understand that for somebody else, this might be much more difficult. But to answer your question, it wasn't a hard decision at all. There were maybe a couple of times every now and then when I would think, what am I going to do for money if, I can't, if I can't get a job, if I can't have any kind of income. I had applied for a few different jobs and nothing really came of it. So that was a little scary, but I knew that I wanted change. I knew that I wanted more God and less yuck.
Yeah. Well, and you made that choice. You mentioned people reaching out. Has your story encouraged other people to quit? Obviously, it sounds like your story's encouraged people to think about it at least and to reach out to you.
Yes. I can't, I mean, all of this is just incredibly mind blowing to me. The amount of impact that my story has had, and just the opportunity to be a witness to others has been like blessing, doesn't even come close to describing it. Yeah, many, both men and women, have reached out to me either wanting to quit producing pornography, and then also wanting to quit consuming pornography. And also, I've also had other just complete success stories where people have reached out and even converted to Catholicism or reverted to Catholicism, just because of how much they can see that it's affected me in such a good way, and they want that for themselves. And so that's my favorite part about this whole experience, is the people who I've been able to touch, I've been able to inspire. I mean, it's just amazing. And I never thought that it would be this incredible.
When you look at yourself, it's only been about a year, which I think is so wild, right? Over the course of this year, when you look at your life before, I had you describe, we sort of started, tell us about your life. When you look at your life now, and you gave us some hints on this, but how have you changed? How has your outlook changed as a result of this journey?
Okay, so everything from tiny little details to huge things. Now, when there are things in my life that, like, our cat just recently passed away. I wouldn't call that a tragedy. She was 15, but it was nice. It was beautiful. I wasn't hopelessly depressed and thinking about like all the times that I could have paid more attention to her but didn't. That's because of this transformation right there. Another thing that I notice is when I'm driving, I'm from the West Coast. I now live on the East Coast, and I live in New England, where it's not just me. There are statistics. These are the world's worst drivers. And I used to just rage all the time. And now, ever since I put a rosary in my rearview mirror, I haven't had a single rage out. And I know that's just the grace of God, but also, and there's really only been one time that I've had to call on it, where I'm about to, throw F-bombs and honk the horn, and do all sorts of nasty things. And then he's right there looking at me on the crucifix, like, really? He's kind of shaking a little bit. Yeah, I'm like, okay. And I mean, even like, when I interact with people, I recently held the door open for someone at the gym and he didn't say thank you. And the Bree that I was before would have totally ripped into him, probably like said something like, you're welcome, something super snotty like that. But my immediate thought was, oh, bless him. He's the type of person who needs the door held open for him. Who is this woman? Like, I blow my own mind of like how, and then I stop and I'm like, really? Did you really honestly just think that? And you really mean it too? Yes, you did. Wow. Who are you? Yeah, there's many, many different occasions when God is working through me, and this peace and this love and this joy that I have in me, it can't help but just seep out everywhere.
Do you struggle at all with, and I don't know the circumstances of, the content, but knowing that this content is created and it kind of lives forever? This is something that I know a lot of people who come out of the industry deal with. What is it like, just sort of knowing you've obviously left that all behind? You're a totally different person now, but kind of knowing that that still exists, is that a difficulty for you emotionally?
In all honesty, no. I'm not really sure why it doesn't bother me, but um, like I guess the reason why it doesn't really bother me maybe is because I did all I could. I shut everything down from my end. And the way things work nowadays is, yeah, it's somebody else will have recorded it illegally and then leaked it to a pirate porn site. And you can still, if you look up my name, find these things, I think. Um, but, that's kind of out of my control. And also, it is who I was. Maybe in a way that will make me a better witness to others is the fact that you can still see who I was. You can still see, like the choices that I made and the absolute narcissistic brat that I was. And in a way, like maybe that's even not necessarily a good thing, but it's okay because that will help people, to really see my transformation.
Yeah, and let me just last question for you, because this is such a powerful journey that you've been on. If you could speak to somebody who's where you were 2 years ago, right, 3 years ago, right now, and maybe it's not just in the adult film, in the porn industry, maybe it's somewhere else, but what would you say to them to help them see the light?
Several things. First, I'd like to pull at his or her heartstrings and say that God doesn't want you to be unhappy, and God doesn't want you to continue to either produce something just for a moment of lust or consume something for that same reason. You are made for more than this. You are a child of God. He wants you to respect yourself, and I want you to respect yourself. If you need any kind of assistance, by all means, please reach out. And from the statistical point of view, not so much heartstrings, but this is going to damage you. It is already damaging you. The lifestyle that you're leading, the things that you're watching, consuming, things that you're doing to yourself. And also, if that's not enough, pornography is directly linked to sex trafficking. Think of, the video that you're watching. It could be shown to some, 10-year-old child in order to instruct him or her on how to perform these things. Like, think about that. And then ideally, your libido will shrink because, that's just the most horrific thing. And they are directly linked. If for no other reason that you should stop producing and consuming pornography. Think of all the different ways that it's so detrimental to our world, our civilization, our society. And I know from experience that I'm much happier. I'm much more content now that I've stopped that.
Well, I so appreciate you joining us, taking us through your journey. And it'll be really interesting to catch up again in a year and see where things are. Just the fact that so many people are reaching out, that your journey out of porn and into faith has had such an impact. Appreciate your time today.
Thank you so much for having me. This was fun.
That's all for today's Newsmakers podcast. Be sure to tune in for the next episode of the show, and also head over to the CBN News YouTube channel and the CBN News channel to watch Newsmakers every week. We'll see you soon.